as the Albanese government is limping into Christmas and an election, of course, in the new year. More bad news today, undermining the relentlessly upbeat message of the Prime Minister and his ministers. Now, upbeat's one way to describe it. I'd probably say it's head in the sand. That's more accurate. The latest set of numbers to demonstrate just how tough things are at the moment are the national accounts, and they were out today. Now, the national accounts matter because they show how we're travelling as a country, whether we're going forwards or backwards economically, and if we are going forward overall, whether we're still going backwards as individuals because total wealth is perhaps not increasing as fast as the population. Now, has it happened? Today's national accounts show anaemic growth, just 0.3% for the September quarter, which means an annual growth number of just under 1%, 0.8% over the past year. Note that GDP per capita, or growth per person, which is, of course, a proxy for our living standards, that's also slumped, meaning this is now the 7th successive quarter of negative growth per person. That's a household recession that's now lasted for almost 2 years. What's more, the little growth we did have, again, 0.3%, was almost entirely driven by government spending. So growth driven by your tax dollars being spent by the politicians, with the federal government's share of total GDP up to 28%, almost 6 percentage points higher than at the start of the pandemic. As one economist said of these figures, and I quote, "They paint a picture of a sad economy without much hope." Still, the self-congratulations certainly flowed from the Treasurer.
Rather avoid a hard landing than clean up after one, and we're seeing elements of a soft landing here, and that gives us encouragement that acknowledging people are still doing it tough and growth is still weak in the economy. If we'd made the sorts of decisions urged on us by our opponents and our critics, growth would be weaker and people would be getting less help and they'd be worse off.
Fig jam Jim. You know, a Treasurer is desperate if he's crowing about growth that isn't even at 1%. But if the government's economic management is so good, how come our real wealth per person is going backwards? Polling out today from the Master Builders Association show the public are just not buying Labor's spin. And they don't think that the bills rushed through the Parliament last week will make much material improvement. A nationwide survey had 1 in 3, that's right, 1 in 3 Australians reporting that they'd gone without essential items last year, such as food, medicine and education, in order to cover their mortgage or rent costs. More than 60% of us think that cost of living's the most important issue for the federal government. And 68% of us say that housing costs, well, that crisis has got worse over the past 12 months. 39% saying that they are struggling to pay their rent or their mortgage. Now, this from a government that made 3 big promises just to buy your vote. The first, that real wages would go up. Well, in fact, they've gone down. Second, that your mortgage paying would ease. Well, in fact, average repayments have doubled. And third, perhaps most notoriously, Labor promised that its renewables-only electricity system would cut your power bill by $275 per household per year, when in fact, and you don't need Peta Credlin to tell you this, prices have skyrocketed despite those massive taxpayer subsidies. But as well as breaking promises, this is a government that's lost its moral compass as well. It was Labor's greatest leader, Bob Hawke, who said that if the bell tolls for Israel, it tolls for all mankind. And yet in New York overnight, the government has yet again voted against Israel at the United Nations, rewarding terrorism, rewarding hostage-taking by supporting Palestinian statehood, even though none of the Palestinian leadership accepts Israel's right to exist. This is a government that's turned its back on the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, partly because it's accepted the cultural Marxist claptrap that Israel's tainted by white privilege or settler privilege. But most particularly because cabinet ministers are scared of the Islamist vote in their electorates, putting crass politics ahead of their long-term national interests and values. This is a betrayal of everything Australia's ever stood for, and it's a serious character failing in our national leadership and the modern Labor Party. Today in The Australian, our foremost political commentator, Paul Kelly, pointed out the obvious, that the Prime Minister can list many things the government's done, but he can't answer the big question. Have Labor's policies actually improved your life? There's little doubt that if there were an obvious alternative to Anthony Albanese, the PM would be in danger from his own caucus, not just the Australian electorate. But his main rival is a blowhard undergraduate treasurer who thinks that establishing a productivity fund is how you improve dismal productivity, that establish a Made in Australia fund is how you rescue manufacturing. At the same time as the government's pro-union policies are killing productivity, and the government's emissions obsession is crippling manufacturing. Even so, there's clearly dissent inside Labor, with the Tasmanian Labor leadership and the AWU demanding that the government protect thousands of jobs in the local salmon industry ahead of green fixations over the fate of the skate fish in Macquarie Harbour. But don't hold your breath waiting for a decision, given this government's fear of the inner city green vote. They're desperately trying to put this decision off until after the election in the hope they hang on to the Tassie seat of Lions. Now, I've said it for some time, but today's national accounts, they confirm it. We are drifting backwards. And we've got a divided government in Canberra without the answers to turn it around or the depth on their front bench to arrest the slide. Right now, all they've proven they can do is spend more of your money badly and continue to divide Australians.